Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our second talk in the series of mental well-being. I think that at 8:45 last night, our mental well-being was instantly buoyed with the confirmation from our president that we could come to school today. And it was so lovely to have your boys back. We look forward to a great 2 weeks, and by then we'll most definitely be exhausted and ready for a holiday. Candace Cowan gave us wonderful insight into why the brain works as it does and how we can use that knowledge to control our own anxiety and to reassure our children. She spoke of deep breathing in an effort to monitor and control our own emotions, and then to let our children know that it's okay to feel scared. She advised that we unplug them from seeing and hearing unnecessary images and information, and ask open-ended questions so that we can understand their perceptions in order to reassure them. This evening, Dr. Colinda Linde will talk to us about mental health awareness and will provide information about anxiety as well as depression, stress, and compassion fatigue. She will share techniques that we can use to manage these in ourselves and in our children. Dr. Colinda Linde is trained in psychodynamic, systemic, and interpersonal and person-centered interventions. Her doctorate in psychology entailed creation and testing of an original intervention to reduce overt and covert anxiety at the time of breast cancer diagnosis. She also trained in Cognitive Behavioural Therapy, which is an active, short-term practical approach where the therapist teaches the client how to become their own therapist. Dr. Linde has been in full-time private practice since 1995, focusing mostly on the anxiety disorders and with an interest in stress, health, and pre-surgery intervention. In recent years, Dr. Linde has discovered meditation and mindfulness and offers mindfulness-based CBT, the best of both approaches. She has written a variety of magazine and medical journal articles and has been a guest on various radio and television shows. I've attended a number of presentations by Dr. Linde. She is engaging and easy to understand. I trust that you too will enjoy her presentation and take a lot out of it. Please, if you have any, type your questions in the chat and we can address these at the end if time permits. Over to you, Dr. Linde.
Hi, goodness, I think I'm going to hire you as my praise singer. Thanks, Joanne, and thanks so much for inviting me. I always love working with you. And I think you are absolutely on point in terms of the brief you gave, that these are the things we need to cover. And in our conversation around awareness, if you don't know, you can't ask for help. So a little bit of context. So I have been trained in that whole lot, but I certainly like CBT more than anything else, maybe because I'm an eldest daughter, but also because my twins are now in matric and I've had to get very practical for the last 13 years. So there'll be, tonight we're going to be doing two parts and I'm going to mix them. So there'll be an awareness component and then always a practical demonstration of a technique. And please don't worry if I'm going too quickly because there's lots to cover. A lot of this is available on my self-help site and it's all free downloads. So you'll see slides of that as we go. It's called thoughtsfirst.com. So don't worry about frantically taking notes. Just maybe go in with a mindset of awareness that I need to know what's okay and what's not okay. So let's begin. I'm going to share my slides. There we go. Hope they're clear. Right, so mental health and wellness in the year of 2021. So if we think of 2020, we thought it would be the year of plenty, but we didn't specify what the plenty would be. And it was fairly horrendous. And at the end of the year, I think everybody thought, 2021 will be better. But it's not better or worse necessarily. It's just different than a year we've probably ever had. So let's think about mental wellness in the context of this. So what is mental wellness? So if there were a static state, you've now got your qualification in mental wellness, or you can buy 5 hours of mental wellness, I think we would all be doing that. And unfortunately, it's not like that. So it's almost like riding a bike, you kind of going along like this, or even an airplane. It's on autopilot, but it keeps course correcting. So mental wellness is a balancing act. So you'll see that a lot of the things I talk about tonight you're doing right already, and then there might be some others which are not so great. But let's also talk about the context of why we find ourselves here. And in all these years in practice, I've never seen a context like this, ever. So I think this one matters. So when we think about the nuts world, this is an hour on its own, but I'll explain. So nuts is novel, uncertain. T is for threat, and that's the horrible part, because the corona is full of that. And not just that, I think the world has gone a bit nut. And luckily for us, there's an S, which is a sense of control. So we can't change novel, uncertain threat, but we can certainly work with a sense of control. And that's what tonight's going to be about. It's also got a lot to do with your change personality and your child's change personality and whoever else is in the house, their change personalities. So my twins are like chalk and cheese. So the things that the one wants, the other one hates, and vice versa. And occasionally they work together. But how you experience change, some kids will love the online, some will hate it. Some will like it for the wrong reasons because they can sleep until 10 minutes before they've got to hand something in. So how you experience change is going to be quite pertinent. So if you like order and you like known and stability, you are not having a great time right now, so you'll need to be putting your anchors in place. If you do like change, this is actually too much for probably anybody, and you might not be anchored or tethered anywhere. So maybe you can take a leaf out of both books, becoming a little bit more agile, like people who quite like change and look for opportunity, and then remembering to be a bit more ordered and to have certain anchors to tether you, like the people who like order would do. Okay, so it's a both and right now. So a lot of people have said we're in the same boat, and I would beg to differ. I think we're in the same storm, but we're in different boats. So, all of our boats are changing. So sometimes your boat's solid, like the QE2, and other times it's a bit leaky with holes in it. So, I think I'd just like you to be very aware. What is the state of your boat week by week? And look around you. What's the state of people's boats? So luckily for me, I work in a group practice, and there's 6 of us. Psychiatrist, 3 psychologists, an OT, and then a sessional psychologist. And so we're all watching each other very, very carefully, just to see, is anyone going into compassion fatigue or are they not? And we've all seen that we very much are different boats week by week, depending on age and stage and health and a lot of things. So look out for that as well. And if you think about it in a nutshell, there were many talks last year on grieving, the stages of grieving, and, stages of loss or grieving, shock, denial, bargaining, overthinking, blame, that moves to anger, that moves to sadness, that moves to anxiety in the context of the world at the moment, and then acceptance. So we did a lot of grieving in 2020. By the time we got to this part of the year, or the latter part of 2020, everybody hit fatigue. And now we've moved to what we call languishing. I'm going to talk about all 3 of these as we go. And of course, uncertainty is the new certainty. I think this we can agree on. And then this one, vicarious trauma, or we call it armchair trauma. So this is where the images we've seen on television recently, and even across the last 18 months, images all over the news. I've taken the media on several times about this, that they need to be thinking more carefully about the images and the headlines that they put out. And, I know that there's always going to be an uneasy relationship between the media and mental health, and sometimes it goes well, like with the Isdemeni trial and, the whole situation that worked well together. But we just need to be very aware of this. I'm sure Candace mentioned this too, that it's so easy to hear about that child is having a breakdown because this happened in the family, people in financial strain, and these things spread. So we need to be very mindful of what we see, what we hear, and what we're engaging, because it's not just when it happens to you directly, but you could feel survivor guilt. Why was I okay and they weren't? And certainly vicarious trauma. It's definitely quite pertinent at the moment, so look out for that. So it all starts with awareness. So let's start with your level of awareness. So if you look at how you started today, can you remember which foot you got out of bed on first? Or was it both? when you brushed your teeth, which I hope you did, was it right to left, left to right, up, down, in, out? And what order did you put your clothes on in? If you drove anywhere, kids were at school today, so if you drove on the school run, how aware were you of how many red lights there were and of what song was maybe on the radio and you thought, oh, I love this. And then there was another song. Well, where did the other one go? Well, it was there, but you weren't aware. Or how often are you sitting at a red light and somebody pops up next to your window and you get the fright of your life? Or the good old, where are my keys, So what is your level of awareness? And I'm not just talking outer awareness, I'm also talking inner awareness. So the inner awareness is very important, and that's what a lot of this evening is going to be about. That what is your mood like? What is your state of mind like? What is your level of stress or anxiety like? So I'm hoping that we're going to work with that inner awareness quite a lot this evening. Many benefits, not just, of course, knowing where you put your keys, but prevention is definitely better than cure. And that's where I'm going to be coming from. Just as an aside, Cognitive Behavioural Therapy, or CBT, is research-based. So everything that I go through with you is going to be partly research-based and then confirmed by a long time in practice. So you can rest assured these aren't just theories people are bandying about. This is really proven stuff. Okay, so let's get going. Knowledge is power. So I'm going to start with the anxiety disorders, and I'm just going to talk about the big ones. There are many, but that's beyond the scope of now. So the big one must be generalized anxiety, and it starts here. And you might be looking at this thinking, well, I have had excessive worry for over 6 months. And in the COVID context, we probably all have generalized anxiety right now. But the worry needs to be challenging to control, and you need to have at least 3 of the following with that. Being restless, fatigued, horrible mental fog, concentration problems, muscle tension, sleep disturbance. So you've got to have 3 of those with 6 months of daily worry, which also causes either significant distress and or you impaired. You can't engage. You're so busy, consumed with this worry. Maybe you can't sleep, you're consumed with it. But you can see on that page that it's quite pertinent at the moment. So the normal statistics are 3 to 8% of people at any given time have this level of clinical anxiety. And in the psychological circles I'm in here and abroad, we're thinking it's pretty much doubled. And then there's a situational version of this, that's sort of a light version that seems to be pervasive all over the place. So I'd say that's easily maybe 60, 70% of people, waxing and waning. So I'm going to give you techniques that work for clinical disorders, because if they work for those, they're going to work for you if you don't have a clinical level. Okay, so as I said, generalized anxiety is 3 to 8%. So the kids who have this, and anxiety is very, very common. It's like the common cold in terms of mental health. So 1 in 4 at some point is going to have some shape or form of anxiety. So it is early, it tends to be chronic, and it's pervasive, and it takes the form of a curve or a sine curve. So just keep that in mind. If you have got generalized anxiety or your child has, and of course we know anxiety, like all these issues, depression, etc., they're all genetically mediated. And then there's the elements of learning, things that happen to you, your environment, etc. But, if there's a genetic history, odds are that you would have noticed this in your child from young. And the techniques I'm going to show you, often you as the parent are quite a good therapist in that you model this. So hopefully kids will do what you do, not what you say. So how does this show up anyway? So there are 2 main symptoms of GAD. So there's worry, which is the cognitive symptom, and there are many other cognitive symptoms, but the key is worry. So it is what it says it is. You're preoccupied with what if future fears. And it's not just one thing. It spreads and it travels. It could be health, it could be money, it could be, well, what if I get sick and then I give it to this one, then I give it to that one. It could be, what if I get it and I get brain fog and I can't work? What if my business fails? What if I get retrenched? What if my child, this, what future, blah, blah, blah. So Of course we're parents, of course we're thinking about this, but it's when it's excessive and it consumes your mind, that's when you need to get worried about the worry. And then the other family of symptoms is the body section, and this is where you're hyper aroused, so what I call yellow alert. You're kind of bracing for when's the next thing going to hit. And so the thoughts are around what if, and then physically you kind of, oh, get ready, get ready. And you can see you get edgy, you tense, you sore, muscle aches, etc. What are we going to do about them? So the first one is to manage the worry. Now, there are 3 building blocks of thoughts. Believe me, there aren't more. You can see if you can find, but there are only 3. And they are these. The section that is immediate, controllable, me now. The types that are uncontrollable, which get a lot of airtime, past, future, others. If only, why, I could have, I should have, I would have, what if, what's going to happen, or deferred living when I get there, and the they, the others, okay? And then your number 3s. So the 3s come from the 2s. So these are your extreme, highly unlikely absolutes. What on earth is that? So absolutes are all or nothing, but these are doom-oriented. So if I get called to the school, it must be because my child's going to be expelled. It might actually just be someone calling from the school to remind you of something, you know, checking an email or something. If I am called in to a particular meeting at work, it can only be because they're going to give bad news. You know, if my turnover was bad this week in the business, it can only mean it's the end. If I can't reach my loved one, it can only mean that something very bad has happened. So we're all a little bit neurotic at the moment, but these consume. So when you're in an episode of worry, you're not doing it because you're silly or because you want to. You really don't. This is chemically driven. It's a serotonin phenomena. And we all have 1s, 2s, and 3s, but when you're in an episode of worry, you will have many 2s and way more 3s. And what happens with 3s is they do magical thinking. They take this and then they link it to that. So the easiest way to remember this is, say, for example, a crime had been committed and I were the state prosecutor and I were being pushed to get a conviction. Anybody, just get anybody. I would just go and pick somebody up off the road and put them on the stand, and then I would address the jury and say, you know, these kinds of crimes are often committed by somebody in this age group, this demographic, and I would list all of this. And even if there were no evidence linking that person to the crime, I wouldn't need it, because the magical thinking would say, you know, this is normally the person who perpetrates. Oh, there's one on the stand. It must be that that person is guilty. And so in the same way, magical thinking messes with us. I haven't heard back from this person about that thing. It can only be that they're not going to get back to me. So earlier today, I was talking to a colleague who'd actually gone away. She was quite burnt out. And she hadn't called somebody back the second she got back. She did the next day. And they desperately wanted an appointment, and then they didn't call back. And she catastrophized it to the point where that's the end of my practice. You know, it's all over because I didn't call that person back. They're going to badmouth me all over the place. And maybe they were just desperate. She was on leave and they found somebody else. It happens all the time, you know. But this is what happens to us when we are in number 3 mode. So we obviously need to do something about this. And our kids are catastrophizing like crazy. So this is really a summary, and please don't worry, that is the self-help free download on Thoughts First. Just go back here. So once we've separated out what the I, me is, what can I do now, we do problem solving. And we try and just focus on, okay, what can I do? And that would be very nice. The problem is that the 2s and 3s are too noisy. So we have to do something about them. So if you, for example, are thinking, what if this, or what if I've been told this, called there, haven't heard this, my child is out of control, or whatever you're worrying about, okay? The number 2 part, which is future, you can do nothing about. You know, nobody can predict the future. Not one psychic foretold the pandemic. It's the biggest thing the globe has ever experienced. not one that I know of. So, and you know, you don't see psychics on islands and things. They're always struggling like everybody else. So if they can't even tell, how on earth are you going to tell? So these twos are a complete waste of resources. And what I often like to remind us is that if there is a spiritual being running the show, that's who gives you the cards. If there is no such being, it's still some other way, maybe random, that you get dealt certain cards in this life. So you got to play them. Doesn't matter who dealt them. And I find that very liberating for myself, just to think, okay, above my pay grade. I don't know why. Can't explain. Don't know what's going to happen. No idea. And so I'm just going to play the cards I've got at the moment, plan as best I can for the future, put it down, play the cards, play the cards, play the cards. So you can see there's a dance between the ones and the twos. So whenever there's a two, write it off. It's a massive waste, and you wouldn't waste time, energy, and money on rubbish. So don't do it on your number twos. Get back to the ones. And sometimes that's enough, but sometimes the threes are in the way. And these are those extremes. The whole thing is a problem, or I will never be able to. And a lot of our kids are like this when it comes to exams or a new challenge, and I can't cope with going back to school, or I've missed that, I don't understand anything. And that is when you've got a reality test. And one way is to do the numbers. You know, that you always get really anxious before a test. And out of all the times you've written tests, which must be maybe, I don't know, 50 a year at least, how many of those times have you been anxious? 3/4. And how many of those times have you failed that test? Well, none. You know, so that's how you do the numbers, and you look at evidence for each thought. So that yes, you might be anxious, but has that meant that you failed? And yes, you might feel like you blank, but how many times have you really been blank for the whole test, for example? Or what if all my friends forgot me? You know, all my friends forgot me totally. And then that's when you do the evidence. Well, hang on a second. You know, you were just talking to that one on your phone, or that one you were having a chat with about what you're going to do next week at school. You know, so that kind of thinking. I think that's very powerful, just to help our kids to reality test. And we need to be doing it ourselves. Okay, so that's one. And sometimes you just want a mental break from worry, whether it's a GAD level of worry or whether it's just worry. So these are quick ones. You can spell backwards. So think of spelling generalized anxiety backwards. You know, it's quite difficult. You've got to see it in your head. You've got to mentally track it back. You've got to use your left hemisphere, your language, to spell it backwards. You use the frontal, the back. You use pretty much the whole brain to spell a word backwards. Or subtract backwards. So you pick a number, a random number, like 902 minus 7. Minus 7. Already I can see people rolling their eyes, I'm sure. You know, no, I can't do that. And then the running commentary is for when you say, are in company and you're just feeling really, really anxious and that you feel like you might just lose control. And the running commentary is where you just mentally look around the room. There's a window, through the window, there's a tree. I see some pink flowers. They're not blossoms. I see a tree there. If you're in South Africa, I see an electric fence. I see a bird on the wall. I can see it's not quite sunset. Here in this room, there's this interesting thing on the wall. Over here, there's this thing that's Namibia, but just with a yellow sheen on it. So I hope you can see what I'm saying, that you're totally distracted. And we want to distract ourselves for just 2 minutes to give yourself a mental break from time to time. And then let's not forget the physical symptoms. So I'm going to zip through these. So something called the flop is one of my favorites, and you can't really do it in public. Maybe you could at home teach everybody, or if you go back to the office, teach everybody so they don't think you're mad. So it works on a principle called reciprocal inhibition. So the way I understand it is, if you had a plastic ruler and you bent it up and then suddenly let it go, it wouldn't just gently go back down, it would go beyond and then settle. So what this technique, behaviorists discovered this in the 70s, is if you tense your entire body for 30 seconds, which I'll demonstrate, and then suddenly flop, no elegant flops. You've got to flop as if you've been shot, they say. You've just got to let it go quickly, and you'll feel there's a very deep relaxation. So I'm going to demonstrate this. So you would put your knees up, hands behind your head, and then for 30 seconds, push back with your head, forward with your hands, squish up your face if you're on your own, tense your core, tense your legs, feet are turned upwards. And you would do this for 30 seconds, probably start shaking a few seconds in, and then I'll count us down just very quickly. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, flop. Okay, and that's how the flop works. So if you're just having a rough day, or at night, if you find you struggling to fall asleep, or you're just very tight, this is 30 seconds, and you can do 2 or 3 of them even if you need to. So that's one of my favorites, 30 seconds. And then the next one is a squeeze ball and turtle mouse. I'll explain. So my children were they're sort of very funny to give me one of these as a squeeze ball. Ha ha, mom, here's your gold bar. Anyway, so squish anything. I like this kind of squishy squeeze ball, but you can squeeze a pen, the side of your chair, anything that's got a little bit of squish. If you're driving, the wheel. So what we're going to do is we are going to manually trick the brain into relaxing. That's what these techniques do. So together we're going to squeeze, breathe in through the nose and then out through the mouth, and then I'll explain turtle mouse. So breathe in and squeeze, and then out as you release through your mouth. Very slowly. And now we're going to do what I call turtle mouth. So it's the exhale through the mouth that actually really calms you down more than the squeeze, although together they're better. But when you're on your own, you can actually breathe out like this, so that the air touches the lower lip. That's how we call it turtle mouth. So this causes a very deep parasympathetic response, which is the calming chemicals, and we want those. Okay, so let's do this one together. So breathe in and squeeze, and slowly out. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'm going to move on. The diaphragmatic breathing, I believe Candace did, and that is where you pretty much are breathing as if you're blowing up a balloon in your stomach. Keep your chest flat and just breathe with your diaphragm, which feels like your stomach going up and down. And then, of course, mindfulness, which I'll get to as well. And mindfulness doesn't just work for the body, it works for the mind, and it's brilliant for ADD. And I think all of us have ADD at the moment. You know, if you think about you just scroll, you read the first few seconds or first few sentences of an article, maybe just the headline, scroll, scroll, scroll. So we've all got ADD at the moment. Yes, there is clinical ADD too, different kinds, but we all pretty much are in that boat. So we need to be mindful. And here's your self-help tool. Okay, so panic attack. So I'm just going to go through this one more quickly. So a panic attack is just the seemingly out of the blue, unexplained symptoms. And what happens is you think of a pot that's too hot and eventually it boils over. That's actually what a panic attack is. And once it happens, nobody's sitting there telling you, so you misinterpret these physical sensations because you don't understand why this is happening. Heart's going crazy, you can't breathe, you feel dizzy, you can't think properly, your stomach feels awful. And so that leads to danger. They must be dangerous. And then we're very scared after that of ever feeling that awful feeling, which leads to the fear of fear. I hope I don't get this again. And that's when avoidance and agoraphobia come out. And they can appear with any of the other anxieties, like social phobia. You have a panic attack when you have to speak up. Or normal phobia, say of spiders. You know, you see one, you have a panic attack. Or say OCD, you can't do your ritual, you have a panic attack. So let's just talk about this visually. So it starts with these physical sensations. You then have thoughts, this is dangerous. That releases more adrenaline. You get more physical sensations. There's a vicious cycle. You don't know this. So afterwards you think, what was it about that situation that caused that awful feeling? And then you remember the threat. Then you release more adrenaline, and oh no, just thinking about the situation has given you physical sensations. So now it's evidence that that situation is very bad. And again, there's something on my site about this, don't worry. So more interestingly, what do you do when someone's having a panic attack? So remember that it's the pot boiling over. It's not dangerous. The feeling is real, but the alarm is false. So even if somebody came to test your alarm, you would know cognitively that it's a false alarm, but you'd still have the reaction. Think in a horror movie, you know it's not real, it's all CGI and green screen, but you still jump and you still think about that thing afterwards. So the feeling is very, very real. It cannot just be snapped out of, but the alarm is false. But now is where it gets interesting. So there's one reflex in the body which has three names. The first name is fight or flight. The second is survival instinct. And the third is panic attack. Anxiety attacks aren't really a thing. It's just a misnamed panic attack. Same thing though. So panic, survival, fight or flight. Three names, one thing. Now, if your survival instinct could kill you, that would be a bit of a design error. So don't worry. It looks and feels spectacular, like a pot boiling over, but it's not dangerous. It's actually, ironically, just you releasing a bit of that adrenaline. It's actually your body telling you that you're pushing too hard a lot of the time. So just remember this, it cannot kill you. The feeling is real, but the alarm is false. And that cycle I showed you, each of them has a 2 to 4 minute life of an adrenaline spurt. So your quick fix there would be to use distraction, to immediately distract the person away. So please do not do mindfulness practice there unless you are very well versed in mindfulness, because there's nothing worse than somebody being told, focus on the feeling, be okay with the feeling when they think they're dying. Okay, so this is not the place for mindfulness. Distraction works better as a quick fix. And movement. So slow it down, keep them moving, don't let them freeze. Let them move to get that adrenaline out and to prove to themselves that they feel dizzy or weird, but they can actually still do. They can still perform. And also remembering that you learned it so you can unlearn it. So that's very good news. And, in our country, we're learning new place names and new heads of state and all sorts of things, or not heads of state, but ministers of this and that, and we're learning all the time here. That's one good thing about South Africa. There's always action, so we're always learning and unlearning. And think about maths. We thought naught was the absolute, then there was the world of integers. So we're always learning and relearning and unlearning. So we can do this as well with a panic attack. Very important. And there is a detailed self-help on Thoughts First. It's thoughtsfirst.com. Okay, social anxiety and masks. So there was a question around that earlier. So introversion versus social anxiety disorder. So what's the difference? So social anxiety disorder is an excruciating fear of being observed while performing. And that could literally be, walking into a room when others are already seated. It could be eating. It could be on the phone in front of other people. So introverts don't like it much, being on the spot, but can learn to do it. But people with social anxiety can be introverts or extroverts. And so typically the specific social anxieties which are around public speaking, that is the number one fear, even more than the fear of death. And that is typically your extrovert who's got excellent social skills, chat, chat, chat. And the second that they're on, they start having a panic attack and they can't perform. So that's typically how I see it happen with extroverts. And funnily, introverts, if they're prepared, are very, very good at performance. Where extroverts are brilliant at social skills, their brains just do. Where introverts have to learn how to do that. So let's unpack that a little. So your introvert is basically saying, I don't want to. I don't feel like engaging in that big group. I don't feel like that big gathering. where the person with social anxiety, typically introvert or extrovert, says to me, I really want to, but I just can't. And, this fear sits in the frontal lobes. So the frontal lobes of people with social anxiety are much bigger. And so the upside is you couldn't be a psychopath, sociopath, antisocial, whatever they're called these days, because they've got tiny frontal lobes. So ironically, you're at the other end. And in the front is where your executive functioning sits. All the good stuff, your personality, spirituality, a lot of your personality that's more abstract, your creativity, your abstract thinking, your problem solving, all the executive stuff sits in the front. But the inner critic also sits there. And that's what we suspect sits underneath social anxiety. A lot of studies still going on there, but that's one of them. So the person with social anxiety has this massive megaphone inner critic. As you walk into a space, everyone's watching you and everyone's thinking this or that about you. So it's more excruciating than somebody else would be experiencing. So just going back to the introvert-extrovert story, introverts prefer more quality interactions, more depth. And it's not that they can't be loud and noisy. They can when they're comfortable and relaxed for a period of time. And then the brain's done. Then it needs to go and regroup. So it's like a battery. It charges when it's alone, runs down, needs to go and charge again. The extrovert brain works on dopamine, which needs more quantity. And so the extrovert can make friends in a flash with anybody, anywhere, most of the time. And it's like a dynamo. It needs contact to tick over. So your extrovert kids cannot wait to get back to school or engage. They might have been quite depressed and felt really flat and lacking in energy because they're like water wheels. They haven't been able to engage as much. Where your introvert kids might have loved being at home and online school, and they're now a little bit twitchy about going back to school. And they're the ones who are quite happy with masks and social distancing. As I said earlier, there's specific or general social anxiety. It does present that way. And just remembering that introverts may need some time to warm up. So the introvert brain works on long acetylcholine pathways. And there's an excellent book that explains this. And it explains also from a parenting perspective how to parent an introvert child. So it's called The Introvert Advantage. And there's another one called The Hidden Gifts of the Introvert Child. And the author's surname is Linde, Laney. She's an American psychotherapist. So The Introvert Advantage and The Hidden Gifts of the Introvert Child. So introversion is not necessarily social anxiety. Introverts just need a bit of time to warm up and might need a bit of practice on social skills. And they don't necessarily seek this kind of interaction anyway because it makes them tired. Where the person with social anxiety just cuts out of life because any performance of any kind, even having to go and ask somebody in a shop, can you show me where this is? They just can't do it, no matter how much they rehearse. And this is obviously where CBT and meds come in, and it works unbelievably well. So Candace did a program called Cool Kids. So if kids are probably below 10, they respond very well to that, and then normal CBT for kids above 10. And then, of course, as I said before, you'll change personality and how quickly you shift set. So sometimes you can feel a little bit rusty if you haven't engaged socially for a while. We've all just engaged on screens. Nobody's really had to behave themselves well socially. All these memes going around about people in their PJs, below the desk, etc. So your change personality and shifting set are important. So, when masks finally come off, I think it's going to be a bit of a challenge as much as we've complained about them. And you'll find people who don't like change struggle to put them on, and now they're going to struggle to take them off because that shifting set takes a little bit longer. And we're all different, different color pencils in the pencil box, same as humans. So we need to be a little bit more tolerant with each other about that. And so these are more technical things with social anxiety. There tends to be a closed feedback loop. The person cuts off and they assume that everybody's watching based on no evidence. And they then look for the one person who seems to be not enjoying the conversation or in a speech, maybe looking at their watch or their phone, and then they have a bias to that, as in that means that I'm saying something stupid or wrong or etc. But this is really in the field of CBT. I'm not going to get into this now. And then the egocentric technique is quite helpful in social anxiety. And that's just really proving to people that actually you think everyone's focusing on you, but everyone's focusing on themselves like you are. So who's actually watching you and for how long? Because to be honest, people are much more interested in themselves. That's all of us. Okay. Let's talk about stress. There is also a download on this. So you can think about stress as the stress equation. So it's a relationship between demands and resources. So demands can be outer and inner. So they could say be you feeling sick, or you having compassion fatigue, or maybe you've just got a lot on your plate and a lot in your mind. And then the external demands, time and finance and people. And then what are your resources? So resources are inner, health, resilience, information like tonight, and then your support systems around you, spirituality, that kind of thing. So we're all in the top one. Demands are bigger than resources, and that's stress. And we're aiming for the middle one, where you're breaking even, and that would be coping. And then from time to time, it's not a constant state. We have optimal, where resources are actually bigger than demands. And every now and then that happens, so we should enjoy. But it's more realistic to go for coping with periods of stress or optimal. That's more realistic. So what I find very helpful for each person listening, I would like you to always remember prevention's better than cure. And if you catch something quickly, one match can burn down a whole house. So when you pick up one of your early warning signs, and you'll have an order in which they appear, immediately take note. So physical warning signs typically happen on your skin, or in terms of allergies that are worse than usual. Just for the last month, you're just sneezing and you're full of mucus, etc. I know that's gross, but that's one of the big ones. And stomachy symptoms, headaches, tightness, and, funny quirky skin things, little eczema rashes or itches or things like that don't want to go away. So that's the first typical set of symptoms, physical. And then behavioural are the other ones, the fourth on the list, that are also more obvious. And those are typically avoidance and comfort and being unusual. So say if you're normally very chatty and you're now the one who's just depleted and you're quiet, that's a behavioural sign. If you are comfort, eating, drinking, spending, whatever you're doing, binge watching, i.e. avoiding maybe work or things like that, then that's also a behavioural sign. Or if you normally are very quiet and you're having these outbursts. So just look for anything out of character in yourself, and maybe people around you, you can help each other. What are your signs? And then emotional, yes, just if there's a change from how you normally present emotionally. Say you don't normally get angry and suddenly you are, or you're normally quite even and suddenly you're questioning reality and getting existential. And then, of course, cognitively, just listen for those little key phrases, push on, push on, push on, you've got to do this, can easily go into, oh, got to do this. Okay, one of my clients said to me some time ago, well, I'm 60 now, I'll be dead soon, it's almost over. Now that is worrying. Okay, he does have depression, but this is different than his normal depression. So obviously when I heard that, I had to sit up and take notice. So look out for your early warning signs, very important. And then, of course, there's much more information on here, on the stress equation. A clip on that site if you prefer to watch that on the homepage. Right, so depression. So depression is about a cluster of symptoms across a 2-week period, and we're talking every day. So you need to have a sleep and a mood problem. So initial insomnia means you can't fall asleep. Terminal means you wake up in the early hours and you can't get back to sleep, or you're sleeping more than 9 hours and you just want more. That's the sleep problem. And then mood, flat, weepy, irritable. And then 3 of the following, which typically would be the interest motivation section. Libido goes very quickly. And then your cognitive, depression, memory, or concentration, you just can't remember. And some people have recurrent thoughts of death. This is also how it shows up in students and in the workplace. So long ago, before COVID was even a concept, I'm talking maybe 25, 30 years ago, everybody was saying that depression is going to be the leading cause of workplace disability by 2020. And it already was before COVID showed up. And look at these cognitive effects. You can't think, you can't make decisions, you can't do problem solving, you don't know what deadlines are, you can't think long term. So these are very much the cognitive effects of depression. And some of the newer antidepressants, there's one called Brintellix, which is actually specifically designed for this kind of depression. What do we do with it? So this is another workshop, but basically you're looking for micro tasks, behavioral activation. Make a cup of tea, sort out that one section of your desk, file those 5 papers, pack your notes, pack your bag, and look out for the negative cognitive triad, which is yourself, the world, and the future. So there's a negative filter, and everything comes through that. I am helpless, hopeless, bad, to blame. The world is all negative, and it's never going to get better. And so right at the bottom where I mentioned hope, even if you do nothing, things change. That's true. So they're not always in a downward spiral. They tend to come and go. So, this is definitely where CBT and meds come in. And then look for cognitive distortions. If somebody is really marked on their all or nothing thinking, magnifying the one thing that went wrong, minimizing anything else, emotional reasoning, I feel bad, therefore it is bad, and now it'll always be like this. There's no hope of it ever changing. You need to be hypothesizing depression. And here's a site which has mindfulness goodies on it. Now, depression versus burnout, this is something I'm asked almost on a daily basis. What do they have in common? Fatigue, exhaustion, cognitive effects, right? What's the difference? You look forward to the weekend and your grandchildren or your pets or, when somebody is still excited to see their loved ones, especially children, pets, that kind of thing. And Friday, yay, Sunday, blues, and then it's more burnout. Where depression, everything is affected, everything. Passion fatigue is where a lot of us are at, and this is for all caregivers, frontline, etc. So stage 1, we know there's an emotional exhaustion which becomes a physical exhaustion. You just can't recover even if you have a week's leave. And women tend to do stage 2, which is where you're basically questioning, what's the point? Am I making a difference? Am I helping anybody? What's the use of me even being here? And then everybody goes to number 3, which is what it says, depersonalization, venting and complaining and blaming and just angry or cynical and cut off and, I don't care. So when this happens, you definitely need that time out because there's no cure for burnout other than a reduction in your responsibilities and, just a bit of time to recover your energy. And this is a new word that's been around for about 2-3 months, languishing. So it's not burnout because you still have some energy, and it's not depression because you're not entirely hopeless. But after the intensity of 2020, this is kind of a lack of joy. So there was a movie about the meh emoji. So it's kind of a meh, blah, indifferent, who cares kind of feeling. And that apparently is languishing. So this is now something new. And it's all about feeling just empty and stagnant, and I'll never be able to go out again without a mask on, and not quite depression, but just sort of very bland, and life is just happening to me. So you're not flourishing, but you're not fully depressed. Indifferent to your indifference is a way that it's been described. And you can read much more about that one online. But naming it helps, and just little bits of connection with others, having little bits of meaning and purpose. Checking your comfort behaviors, because there's something now called revenge bedtime procrastinating. So it feels, well, all day I've been working and on my screens and having to wear a mask and I can't do this and I must do that. So at night, 10 o'clock, everything's quiet, but then you're on your phone for 2 hours. So that's not such a great idea. And then just this restless search, like I need meaning, food, and scrolling, and let me get onto another site. And so one of the other antidotes is flow, where you just have, just a small activity that you get into the flow of uncluttering something. Or I like cleaning the dishes, thank goodness, because of course I have teenagers. So I like making order, not so much with filing. But you'll find there'll be certain little flow things that you can do, just tidying a drawer or pulling out weeds in the garden. Your gardener will love you. And in a work context, just little blocks of time. Phone is up, over, silent, no notifications for just half an hour, and I managed to get that done. So these are some quick fixes for languishing. And this is for whether you're talking to your partner, somebody at work, staff, your kids. And I know Candice did a lot more about this, but this is more for the grown-ups. So if you don't know it's there, you can't ask for help. And it's very sneaky how these things slide in a lot of the time. So pick a time and a place. Ask for permission to have the conversation. Have you got a few minutes? I just wanted to chat to you about something. And then just say what you see. You're not yourself, and you don't feel like you lately. And then that's it. And then you shut up and you listen. Very, very powerful. And you can have some evidence. Well, in that meeting you said this, which shocked me. Or when that person called you that, you just kind of sat there and accepted it. Things like that. Even with your kids, you don't quite seem yourself. You haven't come and joined us for dinner for a couple nights. What's happening? So like that, how to have that conversation. And then finally, I've got a self-help meditation technique. But I just want to check, are there any burning questions, or can I quickly demonstrate this one?
We have no questions yet, so we'd love for you to demonstrate that.
Okay, good. I'm sure there's so much to absorb. Everybody's shell-shocked. But, I couldn't leave anything out.
No, they're all listening very intently.
Good. Okay, so this is one of my go-tos. This is for mind, body, depression, anxiety, all of that. And this is one, it's also very good for ADD. So there's a ton of research that shows that when you are focusing your attention inward, obviously that's going to help train that attention muscle. So that's good. Also, depression is a rumination backwards, and anxiety is almost like a forward rumination, catastrophizing. So what this technique does, it's a generic technique to keep your mind single-pointed. And so that's the one. The other trick is that it actually is very useful out of meditation. And I'll demonstrate that in a mo. And in addition to this, people often think that meditation has to be a spiritual thing. It doesn't. Definitely not. And they also think that meditation means you've got to stop your thoughts. Well, I don't know about you, but that's not going to happen in my reality. And it's not necessary. So we're going to work with this thing. And let me actually demonstrate this and talk you through. So if you're looking at the clouds, you can see that the clouds are changing shape, so they're transient. They're also impermanent. There'll be, Joburg skies, there'll be none after a while. And we know, this is a bit of a strange sentence, but we know that all the weather, not just the clouds, is arising and dissolving within the space of the sky, moment by moment. So even when you can't see them, we know that there's weather forming in the sky. So there's a lot of action with the weather. So if we think of clouds or the weather in summary, whether they're storms or rainbows, sunrise, clouds, sunset, they all look very different, but they're all transient and changing. They're all impermanent, and they're all arising and dissolving moment by moment. Now the sky, if we look at that, the sky is doing none of that stuff. It's just vast, clear, empty space, not nothing, just a great big space within which this is happening. And this is where it becomes useful to us. So the sky is very much like the mind. So your mind in its natural state, and we've all had that in our lives, your mind in its natural state is a vast, clear, empty space, very peaceful. Okay? And within it, we have storms and rainbows and clouds and random bits of junk. And so the inner weather is your mental activity. So I'm going to talk you through this exercise for just a few moments, and you can definitely use this one in your day. So where you're sitting, if it's safe, just gently close your eyes, find a position where your back is straight but not tense, and just relax into the posture. And just let go of any tightness, tension, or negativity. Just allow it to fall away. Take a moment to presence yourself. Become aware of the ground under your feet, the seat that you're on. And then allow your consciousness to drop from your head down to your heart center in the center of your chest. Just helps with concentration. And now imagine that you're looking up at a big blue sky, and it's a vast, clear, empty space. Peaceful, beautiful space. And if you watch that sky for quite a long time, you would see all sorts of weather patterns in there. Fluffy clouds, interesting shapes, changing moment by moment. Maybe some storms, maybe some rainbows. And all of those things would be coming and going. So they'd be transient, changing, they'd all cease completely as well at some point. They're impermanent and arising and dissolving within the space of the sky. And so the true nature of the mind is also a vast, clear, peaceful, empty space. But there's a constant chatter of mental activity or inner weather. And so now we're going to turn our attention inward and simply observe this. So we're observing the process of arising and dissolving without being too worried about the content. So it doesn't matter what or why is arising or dissolving. We're simply observing with interest this process of things arising and dissolving. All sorts of things, more or less, faster or slower, changing themes. So just turn your attention inward for a few moments and don't follow or think about, just watch. Notice this process of things arising and dissolving, moment by moment, within the space of your mind. Don't follow, just watch. And every now and then you may realize you've started following something, or thinking about something, or become distracted by something outside. And when you notice that, you can simply remind yourself, don't follow, just watch. Just watch this process. And after a while, the mind becomes very relaxed, because it no longer has to be involved with thinking about or doing anything. It's simply watching the process. When there's nothing really much arising, it's watching that. When there's more stuff arising, it's watching that. And now you can relax your concentration. When you're ready, gently open your eyes. Okay. So I'm going to stop the screen share. I think I have. Yeah. Okay, so it's that simple, and you can see how that'll really help single point you with concentration. You're not going to ruminate back, catastrophize forward, or be doing the ADD thing. And it's quite relaxing because you're not having to do anything. You're not supposed to have a blank mind. What will you do with that anyway? So it's much more about being in control and identifying with being the sky and not being the weather that's coming and going. Later on, you'll do problem solving. But when you're just watching, there's nothing to do. There's nothing on your agenda, just watching. And that's the beauty. So it works incredibly well. Okay, so I'm sure everybody's either very relaxed right now from the flop and the clouds, or they're busy digesting all of the stuff they've heard. I'm just checking if there are any questions.
Any questions? There are no questions. There's just some messages of thanks and appreciation for everything that you've said tonight. I feel like after that exercise, it's a bit of a hospital pass now, trying to think of to thank you. But I really, as always, find you so inspiring and take away so many doable strategies that really do make a difference. Mostly, I'm glad that everyone listening is focusing on themselves, and that's not only because they're egotistical, but because you've given us so much to think about. And that means that hopefully we'll have some less anxious parents, less anxious children, and less anxious teachers. So thank you very much. It's really appreciated.
It's always a pleasure. And, you know, I think as a school, the fact that you're being proactive around mental health, you know, that this is cutting edge, but Pridwin generally is, I must say, even though my children aren't there, but don't repeat that. But, you know, I think, yes, absolutely, because we're all in the system together. You know, we're their mom, or you're the moms at school and dads, and we've got the moms and dads at home who are trying to juggle all of these things. So I really, really appreciate that you've done this for the parents, because there are many, many talks and books and YouTube things on parenting. But, you know, what about the poor parent in the mix? So well done.
I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank Greg, who's sitting here next to me, and he was sitting here last week as well. So thank you, Greg. And also the admin staff who've assisted with the invitation and communication. So thank you. Thanks to everybody. And thanks, moms and dads, for taking the time to come and join us tonight. I hope you found it as valuable as I have. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the evening. Bye.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.